Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. I'm doing these about a day early again just for scheduling reasons, so hopefully I don't miss any questions that come in after I started recording. But as always, if there's anything super important, just reach out directly or just ask again for next week. But let's jump right into it. Bo Lee is getting their 3DO modded with the 3DO RGB kit from Dan, Citrus 3000 PSI, and wants to know what sort of SCART cable you should get. Unless you're in a very specific scenario, you're going to want the 8-pin mini DIN and the 8-pin mini DIN cable, just like Diego linked to. That's for a whole bunch of reasons. I guess I'll do the short version first, then explain it in a second. But unless you are only using HD Retrovision cables, that is the solution, and it's my recommended solution. Now, a little bit of background on this. The Sega Genesis 2 and 3 and anything except a Genesis 1 that used a 9-pin mini DIN cable, but in order to save cost, Sega took all of the RGB components, the capacitors and the resistors, off of the Genesis motherboard and put them in the cables. And that made sense because if you're selling millions of units and you save $1 a unit, that's millions of dollars. So totally makes sense, especially because the overall percentage of Genesis users were not RGB. It was composite or RF. So it made sense to do that. But the problem with that is that technically means that multi-out on the back of all Genesis and Master System consoles are outputting the wrong signal. And, the potential is there to damage devices if you don't have a well-built cable with components in it. But then again, on the other side of things, if you take that well-built cable with components in it and plugged it into an output that is the correct output, the picture will be too dim or won't work at all. Won't hurt anything though, but just kind of, it's just a result of now you're having the correct resistors in both places to make what I'm oversimplifying as a 75 ohm video signal. So that's kind of why. I do know a lot of modders want to make their products, and a lot of super guns and stuff want that Genesis 9-pin mini DIN on there because then people could use their RGB cables, their HD Retrovision, even the Rad2X in certain cases. But that means you specifically need to build your device wrong. And once again, as long as you use the correct cables, everything's totally cool, no problem. But it's still something that is commonplace today. But what's going to happen 20 years from now when all of this equipment still works, but we forgot what cables we got? That could cause a problem. So I'm always encouraging people to try and use the 8-pin mini DIN when possible and just output the correct RGB SCART signal or RGBS signal, and that way anyone in the future could just grab an oscilloscope, touch the pins, figure out what's what, and you don't have to worry about anything. Or vice versa, if you end up just plugging a cable into it to test it out, probably not going to cause a problem. But excuse me, to circle back to your question about the 3DO RGB, while Dan does offer a version that'll work with HD Retrovision cables, I don't think that will also work with a standard RGB SCART cable or with the Rad2X. So once again, unless you are very specifically only going to use the HD Retrovision cables for the entire life of the 3DO, it's a much, much better option to get the 8-pin mini DIN. So hopefully I didn't get too confusing. Hopefully I made that clear enough. But please ask any questions if you need clarification. Joe Paley recently picked up a Sony PVM 20L5. Great find. That is an awesome monitor. Joe says, great picture, but the 15 kilohertz whine is driving me crazy. Only happens on 240p and 480i. I have a number of consoles with good RGB quality output thanks to the site. Thank you. Is there a solution that can go from 240p to 480p for original hardware that I would be happy with? TV accepts component and BNC. Excuse me. Sorry. I guess my cough's coming back a little. There are a few answers to your question. So all CRTs are going to make a high-pitched noise. However, if the capacitors are aging, if there's power circuit issues, and I think a few other things, it could be louder than normal. So in that case, you might just want to look into having the PVM repaired in order to fix that. In the event that, let's just hypothetically say you bought one that's been completely recapped and rebuilt, and that particular frequency just drives you crazy, I think a better solution might actually be to pick up a really nice VGA monitor and only use that, because unless you're a collector, of course, just because that's, the Sony PVM 20L5 is a monitor that It's an expensive, high quality monitor, and a lot of people are hunting these down because they specifically need them for the setups that they run. Generally, people that are mostly running 15 kilohertz with the occasional need of 31 kilohertz, meaning 480p. But to answer your question, some easy devices, I got one right here actually. There are two devices that you could use to do this. The first is the brand new RGB SCART RetroTink. I think it's called the 2X SCART. So you put your 240p consoles into this, and outside of the HDMI port, you just get a very cheap HDMI to component video converter, and that'll work totally fine with that. You could also do HDMI to VGA, but then you would have to get a sync combiner circuit. So in the context of a PVM that could already do component, just stick with component. The total solution would be about $100. This solution is something I haven't had time to review quite yet, but it is the RetroScaler A1. And what this essentially is a pretty high-end line doubler, and you put any of your solutions into this. So you need to get some kind of SCART to D-sub conversion. You could just buy a cable for it. That's no big deal. And then, of course, on the other side, it's also D-sub, so you would need like VGA to BNC. But this device is pretty interesting because it oversamples everything that it gets. So no matter what the console is, it detects the signal and then oversamples into a resolution that looks great in 480p that's compatible with only CRTs. It is not compatible with capture cards. You can't use it with a VGA to HDMI converter on most TVs and monitors. In fact, I would just say count it out, no. It's really just a solution for 15 kilohertz to 31 kilohertz. And if you're somebody that really just only has access to CRT VGA monitors, it's awesome, but it's expensive. It's like $215, $225 or something. And then, of course, there's the open source scan converter where, once again, you would need a cheap HDMI to component video converter and just set it to 2x mode. And then put scan lines on. Now, all three of these devices, when I've tested them on my VGA monitor, if you turn scan lines on in 480p mode, and with the OSSC you turn the scan lines to 100%, it looks really close, really, really close to a BVM, to the point where if you never owned your 20L5, you might not be able to tell. Like if you just visited a friend, saw their 20L5, went home, plugged it into your same size, same brand, like a 20-inch Sony VGA monitor, if you ran any of these solutions with the scan lines on in 480p, you probably wouldn't notice a difference. So, three solutions that I presented hopefully would be of a help. It's certainly worth trying on your PVM because if that solves the issue, you're investing in something that's not so expensive right away. And then just kind of reevaluate. Do you want to hold on to that for your collection? Awesome. But if it's just going to sit in your garage somewhere, maybe consider selling it to somebody in the community that could really use it integrated in their setup. There's a few people I know that professional streamers and stuff that could use one and would pay a fair price. Not like a $10,000 scalper price, but hopefully you know what I mean. So give all of that a try, but if you really love the 20L5, try to find somebody close to you that could do any kind of repair on it, or at least be able to listen and see if it's something that they recognize that can be fixed. Conrad Klaus with an awesome question. What's my favorite kind of beer, and what about a beer you'd never drink? I like all beers. I even appreciate the cheap light ones like PBR. But my favorites are always darker beers. Negro Modelo is one of my favorites. Smithwick's and Guinness are probably up there with my favorites as well. After hanging out with Christoph, one of the co-developers of the Dreamcast HDMI mod, I learned a little bit about how German beer is made and how it has to be under very specific ingredients in order to be counted as beer. And the few beers that I tried that were dark German beers, that's pretty much like officially, to the specs, but still really dark, I really like those. Those are kind of my favorites as well. But I just appreciate all beer and like the taste. And sometimes, depending where you're at, if you're eating a steak versus, a salad, some different beers might taste different. What about a beer you'd never drink? I tend to not like really, really hoppy beers. However, if I'm going out to like a concert or to hang out with friends, I might start with one because I tend to drink all fluids fast. So glass of water, a cup of coffee that's not too hot, whatever it is. I drink decaf, by the way. I don't like uppers. I'm too hyper as it is. But, I drink too fast. And if I'm out and I want to last the night, I don't want to get drunk. And, there's a time and a place for being drunk versus enjoying beer. So I might start out with a really hoppy beer. And that way it kind of takes me a while to finish it and then, move on to something else and go from there. The only beer I think I'd never drink again is there's a brand called Rogue, which makes excellent beers, but there was a maple bacon beer, and I love maple bacon and I love beer, but holy crap, the artificial flavors they put in that, I couldn't do it. I had to pour it out, which is, scary for me. I don't want to waste beer, but I think I poured a little bit in a glass, couldn't stand it. I was having a party at the time, poured a little bit for everybody, and nobody could even some people couldn't even sip it because the smell was so off. So I guess beers I would never drink, that one and anything that looks like it's just loaded with nothing but artificial flavors. You ever see coffee shops that do the pump flavoring and you drink it and then you have that weird film in your mouth the rest of the day? That's kind of what that reminded me of too. So yeah, very fun question. I actually quit drinking for January just for weight loss purposes. I want to try to get in better shape. I'm getting much stronger, but I'm still dumpy, so whatever. And of course, I'm still getting over the cough. So I quit drinking for all of January, quit carbs for all of January too, and didn't feel too much different. So, it's kind of always reassuring, even if you're not, if you're a frequent drinker but don't drink a lot, it's still like, hey, I wonder what's going to happen. Can I stop? And yeah, luckily for me, it was just like, all right, no drinking for January. And it was like anything else. So missed the taste, but not much of anything. So cool question. I'm back drinking now. I just had Smittix last night and was very happy about it. And I'm probably going to cut down just because I want to feel a little bit healthier. I actually feel healthy. I just see myself in these videos and go, holy crap, you got fatter. So I feel great. I'm getting stronger, but yeah, whatever. A little off topic to your beer question, but thanks for asking. Couple of questions from Diego. First, the retro board by Brook is amazing. Thanks for the recommendation. I'm so glad you like it. However, there are a couple of lackings. It has no support for Mega Drive, Neo Geo, nor N64. Is there any lagless solution to incorporate these three consoles along with the retro board in the same stick? You told me Neo Geo reads button inputs as is, but can you do it at the same time as that plus something else? So yes. So I believe the Brook Retro has the pass-through. So if you wanted to, you wire all the buttons to the Brook Retro, and then the outputs, just the pass-through outputs, go to a separate DB15 connector that's Neo Geo. Alternatively, you could just wire a DB15 connector directly to the buttons, and you will have two cables going to each button, but as long as you don't plug two things in at the same time, it should be fine. And even then, I'm not sure that it would hurt anything, but just be safe. So that's for Neo Geo. One of the things I did for Sega Genesis is I bought a crappy 6-button third-party controller for the Genesis for it was like $8 or something. Took out the board on the inside and then wired up individually each button to the DB15 connector as well. So, excuse me, to a different Sega Genesis style connector. And I used, I think, the opposite of whatever, I think the receptacle, not the plug port, so then you could use Sega Genesis extension cables to go into your console. So it's going to cut up your stick pretty much. You're going to have the RJ45 connector from the Brook Retro, and then your DB15, and then whatever, I think it's whatever the DB9 connector, I think is the one on the Genesis. So you'll have 3 different connectors and you'll have a whole bunch of wires on the inside, but it does work perfect. And once again, I never plug 2 things in at the same time just to be safe. Next, you have up to 8 devices connected to a couple of daisy-chained active HDMI switchers. Almost all of these are detected properly, but some of them, like the Blu-ray or DVD player, are not. I tried different cables and nothing changes. Is it anything like sync in HDMI that may be messing up? So this gets kind of complicated, and I don't really have a full grasp and understanding of this. So I'll give you kind of what I do know, and hopefully it's close enough. But in order to have a digital HDMI signal, you could have mechanical 2-to-1 switchers, or 1 to 2, they should be bidirectional, that physically, imagine moving the pins back and forth between the two connectors. And that's pretty much the same as using a coupler. So take two 6-foot HDMI cables, plug them in the middle, now it's a 12-foot. And that should never have any syncing issues. But when you go through a switch, generally speaking, there's a digital signal that tells the device, hey, I'm a switch, and I'm plugging it into this. And that's usually what gets messed up. And one of the things that often got messed up is when I used the OSSC, because that obviously sends all those weird timings. So I would change modes, and then everything would stop working, and I would have to unplug and then plug the HDMI switch back in. So the only thing you could really do to solve this issue is try to go, I think Dirk Swizzler still has that thread on the Shmups forum, and people are talking there about what the best switchers for them have been working with all of this stuff, and the ones that give them the least amount of trouble. So that's the best thing you could do. Now, one of the biggest problems with stuff that isn't name brand, so you get like a bunch of rebranded stuff from China on Amazon, you never know when they're switching the guts that are inside of it. It's very common for many manufacturers even to share the same case and have different guts, or one manufacturer owns the case but has different board revisions and stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to keep track of. I wish I could keep a list, and I wish I could just somehow go visit Amazon every now and then and test a bunch of switches or something, but I think we just have to rely on each other for this one. Andrew, last question. I love 2.4 gigahertz controllers. Lagless wireless is a must since I play some 15 feet far from the TV. Yep. However, outside of the Joys and the 8BitDo M30, I couldn't find anything for retro consoles. So the only one that I know of at the time, or at this time, is the Sega Saturn one. And when it first was released, there was a few issues. Some people had versions with a C button that would stick. Mine didn't. And so I think that was hit or miss. And they just released a new firmware a few weeks ago that said latency issues were tweaked. So I heard through the grapevine that they were going to be doing that, so I never lag tested it because it's a lot of work. I mean, if you count setup and teardown, it's like a full days of work just to be able to write one post that says, here's the lag. So I do love doing those things, but time is of the essence these days. So now that they do have the updated firmware, I will test it. I will see how good it works. I used it the other day to play a game, and I found it to be pretty good, but that is just a subjective test. That is not, there's no data there. It's just, I didn't get pissed at it. So I think that's probably the only other one at the moment. There's rumors of a SNES one coming from somebody, from a few people, but there's absolutely no other info than rumors that a SNES one is coming. So I wouldn't hold your breath on that one. For now, just use extension cables, and I think almost every console out there offers them. So hopefully I got all three things. And sorry for the jump cut in the middle, but I heard a whole bunch of sirens coming down the street, and I didn't want anybody to hear their ears. So I nailed stop before I got a chance to. So anyway, hopefully I answered all of them. Let me know if you need more clarification. Baba Yaga wanted to know if in some time it would be possible to play arcade cores on the Mister through RGB and also get the ability to flip the orientation of the image so you don't have to rotate the monitor. They finally got an RGB to S-video converter so you could change the rotation of the entire PVM, but it's a lot of hassle. So I don't know. I think that's something that can be done. I don't know if it's being implemented or anything. I do know that it would require some kind of buffer. And depending on the situation, it could be a few lines, a full frame. And I think in this case, you would have to buffer one full frame because you couldn't start writing part of the frame vertically and then as the other one's horizontally. I know I'm probably explaining that really bad. Mr. Devs, please don't hate me for this. But so it would have to have a frame buffer, and it would have to have something that is programmed in. So it is absolutely possible. It's just it would add a frame of lag, which isn't bad, especially if you're playing on a CRT, then it's really just one frame only. But unfortunately, I think the best solution, if you have the space, is to get a second CRT. And don't forget, too, that like a 14-inch CRT on its side will provide you about the same amount of screen space as a 20-inch CRT that's been rotated, meaning like the image has been rotated on the screen. So that's certainly what I plan on doing when I get more room to have something like this. So yeah, it's not an easy problem to solve. I think it's something that the next OSSC Pro is going to do, but once again, it would require a full frame buffer. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer to the question, but I think I pretty much got it for where we're at today. Joe Kearney says, love your channel and just joined on Patreon. Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate that. Joe's got a quick question concerning composite and S-video sources. I've got lots of consoles and systems that only support composite and don't really have much interest in modding them to provide RGB, but I am looking for the best method to convert composite or S-video to HDMI. I saw your RetroTink review and that seems like the obvious choice, but I do have an old OSSC DVI version that sat unused and would like to know if there's any other solution that it might provide. Does there exist any sort of composite or S-video adapter that'll convert SCART that you could use with the OSSC? Does that even make sense, or should you just go get the RetroTink 2X Pro? So, excellent question. There are two answers to this question, though. The first and easiest solution is grab either a 2X or a 2X Pro. The video should go through, Ray's video at least, goes through the differences between the two, scan lines, a little bit more filtering options. But doing it that way is just you're done. Like, you plug your consoles in, it works, it looks good, I don't have any complaints. And from my personal opinion as well, is when you have a noisier image like composite or like a console that has more jail bars, only stretching them to 480p with the scaler, excuse me, and then letting the TV stretch it to the resolution of your TV seems to mask a lot more of the interference than if you went direct to 1080p or even 4K when that's possible. So excellent solution, nothing at all wrong with that. But since you already own an OSSC, you might be able to buy either a RetroTink or the new device called the Koryo that just opened to the public today as I'm recording this. And both of those, the Koryo goes directly from composite and S-video to component. I always mess up component and composite. I want to make sure I got it right. And that way you could take those sources, run them through your OSSC, and then run that out to your TV. Alternatively, you could do the same thing with a RetroTink 2X, either the Pro or the original. You can get a very cheap HDMI to component video converter. I think mine are $20 and they work totally fine. Also put that through the component input of the OSSC and go from there. But then you run into an interesting issue. Do you leave the OSSC in generic mode or do you load up profiles for each console? And then you could theoretically get a really good signal, but then it's the same, I don't want to say problem, but it's just the same procedure that you always have to go through. So if you're switching between Genesis and Super Nintendo and you want it to look really good, you go into the menu, you switch your profile, figure out which resolution of which game you're using. And, overall, I think many people probably leave it in generic mode, which still does a very good job. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So it really just depends on how much effort you want to put into when you play your games. For me personally, when I actually have a moment to sit down and I'm gaming on a flat screen, and I know I'm going to be in a good session, like at least an hour, I absolutely would take the OSSC, figure out the profile stuff, set the phase, and make sure that's working. But, I mean, that's just something you're going to have to keep in your mind versus leaving it in generic mode or just getting a RetroTink. So, depending on your overall situation, maybe think about this and figure out what's best for you. The original RetroTink in a converter to a component is about, give or take, about the same price as the Koryo. So, I don't have the Koryo yet. As soon as I do, I'll do a comparison and see if there's any difference. I don't think there will be, but, it's always good to know. So if you're not in a rush, maybe wait for that. If you are, you can't go wrong with RetroTink products, so maybe just pick one of them up. And then if you decide that you really want the ultra sharpness of the OSSC, just buy a cheap converter and use them plugged into each other. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Newt says they're trying to get the best picture out of their PlayStation to finally sit back and start playing some long overdue RPGs. They ordered one of the new 2X SCARTs from RetroTink, and they're going to get a Sync on Luma cable next. Is this a good setup to ensure a crisp PlayStation image? Considered OSSC, but we'll wait till Pro version. Also, if I get a Sync on Luma cable from eBay, is there a way to test it? Otherwise, I could just get one from the retro sites if they're in stock. Well, first, I do have to give you my typical warning. You have no idea what you're getting off of eBay. you know exactly what to expect when you're getting a cable from these manufacturers. Everybody makes mistakes. There's a problem every now and then, but their customer service is great. So I would always try to find the three major ones that I've been in touch with and verifying now since pretty much they came out are Retro Gaming Cables in the UK, Retro Access in the US, and more recently, the past few years, Insurrection Industries, also out of the US, and they sell on Amazon too. Links are all on my PlayStation page for anybody that that needs to pick one up. So I strongly recommend not picking one up off of eBay unless you know the seller, because you're probably going to get some unshielded stuff that, it's probably not going to be the best. But the other side of your question, is the 2X SCART from RetroTink going to look good? Yeah. So your choice to not use the OSSC means that you'd never have to worry about resolution switching or anything else. You just plug it in and it works. I personally think it's a great solution. And yes, of course, you would get a much sharper image out of the OSSC, but it's always the same issues that I just talked about. Make sure to set your profiles, make sure different games don't have different issues. Although I think PlayStation's generally pretty easy compared to some of the rest. So my personal opinion is what you got is an excellent solution. I just strongly recommend using a good cable, because you don't want to end up with audio buzz or something else off of a $2 AliExpress cable or something like that. So congrats on the purchase, and I think you'll probably be very happy with it. Mojosaurus said they were able to inherit a PVM 2030 from their job. Awesome. Very awesome that you're able to pick that up. But they already have a CRT setup that's entirely component-based around the HD Retrovision cables and a G-Comp switch. Awesome setup. I know that Retro Gaming Cables sells the 25-pin D-sub to SCART cable, and Mike Chi just made a component to SCART adapter. So the question is this the most efficient way to get video from my component setup to the RGB port of the PVM? And would you be getting any video loss or interference from the conversion? And would there be a benefit to switching to an all SCART setup down the line? So to answer the main question first, it's an awesome setup. Just don't skimp on the cables from the G-Comp into the Mike Chi's transcoder from component to SCART. HD Retrovision sells just basic RCA to RCA cables on Amazon. They're fairly priced and they're awesome. So that's I don't know if I'd call $25 cheap, but it's a certainly inexpensive and easy solution. So yeah, that's perfectly fine. The only time these days that I recommend SCART over that exact solution that you're talking about is when people are talking in the overall context of their consoles. So if you have 15 consoles and there's only a handful of HD Retrovision adapters available for each, you have consoles then that don't have a component video option. So that's when I would say just get a full RGB SCART setup, and then even if you needed component, do the component conversion later on. Other than that one scenario, though, no, there's no advantage as long as you buy all good cables, which of course that you have. So there's really no advantage at all. And a myth that I hopefully tried to bust a few years ago about that is when it comes to monitors like PVMs that support both RGB and component, it is very common that you'll get them from places that maybe only use the component input or only use the RGB input. So one input's calibrated, the other one isn't. So you plug that same console into a different input and it looks different because it wasn't calibrated to it. So that's something that's very common to run into, and that accidentally perpetuated myths of, component video is always compressed colors or something like that. It's not true, and it's especially not true in the context of the HD Retrovision cables. So I just wanted to add a little bit of of nerdiness onto the end of that, just to reassure you that yes, that's an awesome setup you described. Congratulations, and just my own personal opinion, if you have the space to keep the original CRT, keep it, because you never know what's going to happen from one to the other. Also, thank you very much for your kind words. It's always very nice to hear. And lastly, a few questions from Darkstar7. Does the new RetroTink handle out-of-spec Atari video? The previous model didn't. I don't know. I don't really have any Atari consoles to test, and I wasn't aware that there was an issue. Is that the case with all mods, or is it only certain mods that were done to it? I don't know the answer. That would be my first question, is if everybody's using X mod method and that doesn't work, is there a Y or a Z mod method that might? So no answer for you there. I'm sorry. Is the filtering better for composite video noise or about the same? Because of the way this product was designed, you might be able to notice a difference, but it's mostly the upgrades to this are mostly on the power filtering side of things. So if you were using a really good power adapter, then it probably wouldn't have been an issue anyway. So my personal opinion on this one would be, if you already own a RetroTink, I wouldn't upgrade to the Pro just for the potential of a video quality upgrade. If you were going to upgrade to the Pro, I would do it for something like you want scan lines, or you just really like the full-size HDMI port better. Also, does the Pro always output an always-on video signal that ties up video switches like the previous version? Yeah, but that's something that Mike might be able to address in an upcoming firmware. I haven't talked to him about it yet, but the other big difference between the Pro and the original is the Pro can be firmware updated right on your computer. You don't need like a JTAG programmer. You don't need anything else. So if a firmware update were to be released, I don't want to put words in Mike's mouth or anything, but if one were to be released, it would be fairly simple to update, just, the same way you would a Bluetooth controller and stuff like that. So, overall, it sounds like you're really concentrating on fixing the problem with the always out video signal and Atari, and I don't know at the moment that the Pro is gonna fix those issues for you. So I obviously still love both devices. I just, for your exact setup that you're describing, I'm not sure if this is going to be the solution for you yet. So sorry about that. But if I happen to talk to Mike again soon, I'll ask him about that and see if there's something that he ever plans on. Maybe it's something like, a second firmware that could be downloaded, and if you specifically wanted to auto shut off or something, but that might have more to do with the hardware components. So I wouldn't hold your breath for a firmware update. It might be impossible due to the hardware setup. But I'll ask anyway if I get a chance. Well, that's it for this week. If you're new to these Q&As, please post any question you have in the latest Q&A post, wherever it is that you support. I've been messing with the YouTube settings lately to try to get picked up in the algorithm more, and just to try to make things easier overall. So at the moment, all of the comments are on. I'm not really sure how I'm going to deal with that. I think, respectfully, a lot of people don't seem to realize how much work goes into making sure the comments are safe and everything. All these new YouTube rules about what's right for the algorithm, what you're instructed to watch, and what's your responsibility. It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest with you, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that, but if you have your question, please ask in the support services. I don't really answer the questions that are in the YouTube comments, and that is absolutely no disrespect to anybody. I try my best to answer any questions I can whenever I have time, whether it's on the comments of other videos, on Twitter, on Discord, or heck, if you just run into me somewhere. I always love talking nerd stuff, but these Q&As are just specifically a thank you to everybody that supports, and something I really genuinely enjoy participating in. So no disrespect to anybody else. I just, if I responded to every single support question I got, I could work 24/7, 7 days a week, and not even get to all of them. So, I don't mean anything by that. And of course, on the other end of that, thank all of you who support, because like I always say, you're the ones keeping the podcast going, the website going, all of the behind the scenes research, which is stuff I will finally get to talk about more of in 2020. There's going to be a bunch of very cool changes to the site, to the different things I'm involved in, new projects that are coming out. And the first change is going to probably be by the end of this month. All positive changes. I was going to do it. I was probably thinking of doing it this week, but then I got sidetracked with a ton of other stuff. So, but all of these things have been in place for about a year now. So I'm probably going to post a video and be really excited, and it's not going to make sense why I'm so excited till you see step 2, step 3, and all that stuff. But bear with me. If I'm annoyingly happy, then so be it. So thank you for making all of this stuff happen. Lots of good things coming for 2020, and I don't know, I'm pretty excited about it all. So thank you for all your support, and I'll see you next week.